The rhythmic thrum of the water pumps was the only constant in my life these days, a dull, mechanical heartbeat against the vast, echoing silence. I leaned against the rusted railing of what was once the tidal wave plunge, its faded yellow plastic slick with residual moisture. Below, the main pool stretched out like a gaping, empty mouth, reflecting the sickly orange glow of the distant maintenance lights. This was my sanctuary, or perhaps my purgatory, the water park after hours, slides empty, pumps still running. The air hung heavy, smelling faintly of chlorine and damp concrete, a scent that clung to my clothes and hair. My breath plumed in the cool night air. It was a strange kind of peace, standing amidst the skeletal remains of summer joy, watching the distant, churning water of the filtration system. No shrieking children, no blaring pop music, just the deep hum and the occasional drip of condensation from an overhead pipe. It mirrored my own existence perfectly, a place designed for exuberance, now hollowed out, waiting for a purpose that might never come. My purpose had withered away months ago, slowly, painfully. First the quiet, then the absence, then the crushing weight of what was gone. My parents, then the friend I considered family, all within a year. Each loss had chipped away at me, leaving behind a husk. I'd retreated, found solace in the anonymity of the night shift, overseeing the dormant machinery of a place built for laughter. My colleagues, if I could call them that, were mostly silent figures in the gloom, ghosts themselves. We rarely spoke beyond necessary directives. It suited me. Conversations felt like an effort I no longer had the energy for, like trying to shout over the roar of a waterfall when all I wanted was quiet. The water shimmered in the filtration tank, a murky, churning soup. I watched it, lost in the monotonous churning, when the vibration in my pocket startled me. My phone, a number I didn't recognize. I almost let it go to voicemail. I usually did, but something, a flicker of something akin to curiosity, made me answer. Seth. The voice was crisp, professional, unfamiliar. This is a representative from Hawthorne and Finch Legal Services. I apologize for the late hour, but we've been trying to reach you for some time. My grip tightened on the cold metal railing. Legal Services. The words felt like a fresh cut, tearing open old wounds. My mind immediately went to probate, to some forgotten bill, another bureaucratic entanglement related to the wreckage of my recent past. Yes, I managed, my voice rougher than I intended. This is Seth. Mr. Seth, we represent the estate of a distant relative, a MS. Elara Thorne. Are you familiar with the name? Elara Thorne. The name meant nothing to me. It hung in the air, foreign and unattached. My family tree, if I could even call it that, had always been a stunted, sparse thing with branches that seemed to snap off without warning. I knew nothing of a Thorne, let alone an Elara. No, I said, a frown creasing my forehead. I'm not. The representative continued, undeterred, a practiced cadence in their voice. It appears MS. Thorne passed away 3 weeks ago. Through extensive genealogical research, you've been identified as her sole surviving heir. Sole surviving heir. I was the last leaf on a dying tree, but to what? What could this Elara Thorne possibly leave me? Heir to what? I asked, a strange mix of suspicion and weary resignation in my tone. To her estate, Mr. Seth, specifically to her ancestral home. It's a rather substantial property, though. Remote. There was a slight pause, a breath held as if the representative was considering their next words. And quite old. Remote, old. The words painted a stark image in my mind, a crumbling edifice swallowed by forgotten woods. It sounded less like an inheritance and more like a burden, a heavy, dust-laden mantle passed down by a ghost. But as the representative continued to drone on about paperwork and appointments, a different thought began to form. A house. A home, however old or remote. It was a blank slate, a place untainted by recent grief, a place where the echoes of other people's lives wouldn't constantly remind me of what I'd lost. A chance to be truly alone, perhaps, or to finally begin again. A new place. A new quiet. The next day, I sat across from the representative in a small, sterile office filled with the scent of old paper and stale coffee. They were an older individual, with sharp eyes and a neatly trimmed beard, their movements precise and economical. They slid a thick folder across the polished desk. The deed, property taxes, a few unusual clauses in the will. Ms. Thorne was rather particular. My fingers traced the faded lettering on the deed. The address was a string of numbers and an ancient-sounding road name. The name itself felt like a story whispered in the dark. The representative spoke of the house's isolation, its lack of modern amenities, its significant acreage. They didn't explicitly warn me, but their tone, the slight tightening around their eyes, implied a history, a weight to the place. It's been vacant for years, they explained, tapping a finger on a map. Completely off the grid practically, no immediate neighbors. The local community is quite small and rather insular. Insular, vacant, remote. Every word that described the house felt like a lure pulling me deeper. It wasn't just a property, it was an escape hatch, a way out of the perpetual twilight I'd been living in. I signed the documents. My hand was steady. A strange resolve had settled over me. This wasn't just a house, it was a destination. A place to run to, or perhaps a place to finally stop running. But what exactly was waiting for me there, beyond the overgrown drive and the locked front door? The engine hummed a low, steady thrum against the rising quiet of the road. The city had peeled away slowly, then abruptly, like a shedding skin. Concrete gave way to cracked asphalt, then gravel, then a narrow track barely wider than my tires, hemmed in by a relentless tide of unkempt foliage. I gripped the steering wheel, gripped tight, the strange resolve from the lawyer's office still a taut wire in my chest. This wasn't just a move, it was an amputation. A severing of the tangled nerves that still connected me to the life I'd lost, the people I'd failed. The sun, a bruised orange, began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of regret and fading hope. The air grew cooler, carrying the damp, earthy scent of dense forest and something else, something metallic and faintly chemical out of place in the wilderness. I rounded a bend, and then it was there, an impossible mirage. A water park after hours, slides empty, pumps still running. It sprawled like a skeletal beast in a clearing, its towering slides, once vibrant, now bleached and faded, snaking towards a series of empty pools. The silence was profound, broken only by the distant, rhythmic sigh of water moving through unseen pipes. No laughter, no splashing, just the mechanical pulse of a system running for no one. A phantom whisper in the gathering dusk. I slowed, my foot hovering over the brake pedal. What kind of road led to this? Who maintained the pumps of a ghost park? A chill, not entirely from the evening air, traced its way up my spine. The slides gleamed dully, their curves like hollowed bones. I drove past, unable to shake the image of that desolate, gurgling monument to abandoned joy. It was a stark, unsettling preamble to whatever lay ahead. The track narrowed further, the tree canopy stitching itself together overhead, plunging the path into premature twilight. My headlights carved a tunnel through the gloom, illuminating ancient oaks whose branches, thick as torsos, clawed at the sky. A sudden, sharp turn brought me face to face with it, a gate. Wrought iron rusted to a deep, angry red, its intricate scrollwork choked by vines. It stood ajar, one hinge screaming a silent protest, as if unwilling to let me pass. I pushed the gate open wider, the groan of metal echoing unnaturally in the stillness. The house itself remained hidden, a promise or a threat veiled by the encroaching wilderness. My breath caught, a shallow thing in my throat. I was here. I had done it. The drive was longer than I anticipated, the car bouncing over unseen potholes. Then finally, a break in the foliage. It loomed not suddenly, but as if it had always been there, a permanent fixture of the landscape. The house. It was immense. Far larger than the grainy photos had suggested, its scale dwarfing the encroaching forest. Windows, dozens of them, were either boarded up or stared out with vacant, shattered panes, reflecting the last vestiges of twilight like dead eyes. A grand, porticoed entrance flanked by crumbling columns seemed to frown at my arrival. Ivy, thick as ropes, had claimed entire sections of the facade, pulling at the eaves, obscuring what might have once been intricate carvings. The air was heavy still, carrying the scent of damp earth, decaying wood, and something else. Something I couldn't quite place, a faint, metallic tang like old blood or forgotten copper. I stepped out, the gravel crunching under my boots, a sound that seemed to shatter the profound quiet. It looked like it had been forced open, or perhaps it had simply yielded to the relentless pressure of time. I pushed it slowly. It groaned, scraping against the warped floorboards within, revealing a cavernous entryway. Dust motes danced in the last shafts of light filtering through the high, arched windows. I stepped inside, my footsteps muffled by a thick layer of dust. The entryway was grand, a sweeping staircase rising into the gloom, its banister intricately carved but now draped in cobwebs. I walked further in, my hand trailing along a dusty console table. To my left, a vast drawing room, its furniture shrouded in white sheets like an assembly of forgotten ghosts. Everything was still, perfectly still, as if the house held its breath, waiting. I found the kitchen last, a large, utilitarian space with a huge, cast-iron stove that looked like it hadn't seen a fire in a century. A single, grimy window overlooked what must have once been a garden, now a tangled wilderness. As I stood there, my gaze drifting over the cracked tiles, a faint sound reached me. It came from somewhere above, from the floor directly overhead. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. The house was supposed to be empty, completely, utterly empty. Was it the wind, a settling beam, or something else? Something that had been waiting for me. Paintings, dark with age and neglect, lined the walls, their subjects indistinguishable beneath layers of grime. I walked further, my hand trailing along the cold, splintered banister, sending small explosions of dust motes dancing in the meager light filtering through a grimy window. The air was thick, heavy with the scent of mildew and decaying wood, a smell that clung to the back of my throat. Every breath tasted of the past, of things long forgotten and left to rot. I spent the next few days in a haze of unpacking and exploration. Each room was a mausoleum of forgotten lives, filled with shrouded furniture and the ghosts of old possessions. Dust was everywhere, a soft, silent carpet muffling my steps, coating everything in a uniform gray. I started with the kitchen, a cavernous space with a rusted iron stove and a dry sink, hauling boxes of my own meager belongings in. The silence was the first thing that truly pressed in, not the quiet of a deserted street, but a deep, resonant hush that seemed to absorb all sound, even the rustle of my own clothes. Then came the sounds. It began subtly, a creak from the floorboards above when I knew I was alone on the ground floor, a faint, almost musical groan from the ancient timbers in the dead of night. Just the house, I'd tell myself, running a hand through my hair. It's been empty for decades. It's breathing again. One evening, while trying to clear a space in what I assumed was the library, I saw it. It moved too fast, too fluidly to be a trick of the light. My head snapped up, my eyes darting to the doorway, then to the shelves of forgotten books. Nothing. Only the dust motes still dancing in the thin shafts of light. My heart gave a stutter, a quick, unwelcome thump against my ribs. I blinked, rubbed my eyes hard. Too much reading, too much strain, I reasoned. My mind was playing tricks on me, tired from the endless cleaning. The isolation wasn't helping. I tried to focus, to ground myself. I remembered a time not so long ago when I'd sought escape in places of manufactured joy. I pictured the vibrant, artificial world of a water park after hours, slides empty, pumps still running. I saw the towering slides, slick with residual moisture, their bright colors muted by the moonlight. Why did that memory surface now, and with such a stark sense of desolation? Back in the library, a shiver traced its way down my spine, unrelated to the memory. I glanced around again, my gaze lingering on a small porcelain bird perched on the mantelpiece. I was certain, absolutely certain, I had moved it earlier, placing it facing the window. Now its blank ceramic eyes stared directly at me, its back to the glass. A small detail, easily overlooked, easily dismissed. I must have forgotten, I thought, but a knot tightened in my stomach. My memory felt sharp, almost photographic for such trivial things. Had I truly been that distracted? They were faint at first, like the rustle of dry leaves or the distant sigh of the wind. I'd be drifting off to sleep, and a sound, barely a sound, would prickle at the edges of my hearing. I'd sit bolt upright in the makeshift bed I'd set up in the master bedroom, my breath catching in my throat, listening. The house would be silent again, save for the rhythmic drip, drip, drip of a leaky faucet somewhere downstairs. Not words, not quite, but a breathy, drawn-out sound, like a name being stretched into an ethereal moan. It seemed to come from the walls themselves, from the very fabric of the old house. I pressed my ear against the cool plaster, my pulse quickening, my breath held. The sound faded, then returned, a little closer, a little more insistent. It felt as though something was trying to communicate, or perhaps simply trying to be heard. I pulled away from the wall, my hands shaking slightly. My mind raced, searching for explanations. The old pipes, perhaps. The wind whistling through a loose pane. But the air was still, and the plumbing was so antiquated, I doubted it could produce such an eerie, sustained sound. My gaze fell upon the dusty mirror hanging opposite the bed, its silvered surface reflecting my own pale, wide-eyed face. For a fraction of a second, I thought I saw a distortion in the reflection, a fleeting ripple across the glass, as if something had passed behind me, too quick to register. I spun around, but the room was empty, illuminated only by the weak beam of my flashlight. My throat felt dry, constricted. These were deliberate, but what was causing them? And more importantly, what did it want? My head snapped up, my eyes darting to the doorway, then to the sheer, empty space where the shadow had been. Nothing, just the dim, dust-mote-filled air of the old library, but it had been there. A flicker, a movement faster than any trick of the eye, darker than the gloom itself. My breath hitched. I stood frozen, my hand still gripping the heavy, leather-bound book I'd been about to place on a shelf. The quiet hum of the old house, usually a comfort in its constancy, now felt like a held breath. The unease, which had been a low thrum since I arrived, suddenly intensified. It moved. I spun around, my heart racing, but the space behind me was empty, just the towering shelves of forgotten knowledge. I told myself it was fatigue, the stress of unpacking, the sheer isolation. But the feeling persisted, a weight pressing down, making the air thick and difficult to draw in. The house, once merely old, began to feel, watching. The creaks and groans of settling timber no longer sounded like wood. They sounded like steps, like shifts, like something moving in the floorboards above me, then below me, then just beyond the wall. I started to hear faint scratches, like fingernails dragging lightly across plaster or the rustle of old fabric. I never did, not directly, only ever at the periphery, a constant, nagging suggestion of presence. Sleep offered no escape. My determination, however, didn't wane. If something was here, I needed to understand it. I started with the internet. Days blurred into a haze of search queries. History of local area name house. Unexplained phenomena old homes. Ancestral curses my family name. The results were mostly generic real estate listings, old census data, or forum posts about drafty attics. Nothing concrete. The house, for all its imposing presence, seemed to have no public record of anything truly strange. It was as if its history had been deliberately scrubbed clean, or perhaps never truly recorded outside its own walls. So I turned to the house itself. I went through old trunks in the attic, smelling of mothballs and forgotten lives. I found dusty ledgers in the study, filled with meticulous but mundane entries about harvests and repairs. Then, tucked away in a false bottom of a heavy wooden chest in the library, beneath a stack of brittle, yellowed letters, I found it. A small, leather-bound journal, its cover worn smooth, its pages filled with elegant, looping script. The first entry was dated nearly 2 centuries ago. The author was a distant relative, a woman named Elara. Her early entries were typical for the era, whether observations, notes on household affairs, reflections on her isolated life. But gradually a new tone emerged, a shift. It thrives on despair, and I am so very, very alone. My eyes scanned the next few pages, eager for more, for answers, for anything that could explain what I was experiencing. but the words began to blur. The journal slipped from my grasp, clattering softly on the floorboards. The smell hit me first, a cloying chemical scent like stale chlorine. My vision swam. The rich, musty scent of old paper and dust vanished, replaced by that sharp, metallic tang. The lamplight in the library pulsed, then stretched, becoming a diffuse, unnatural blue. I was standing on concrete. My head snapped up. Towering above me, slick and empty, were the winding, brightly colored tubes of massive water slides. The air was still, heavy and damp. No shrieks of children, no splashing. Just the distant, mechanical hum of pumps, a low thrum that vibrated through the concrete but no water flowed. A vast, silent expanse of plastic and concrete designed for joy, now utterly devoid of it. It was a water park after hours, slides empty, pumps still running, and I was utterly, terrifyingly alone within its abandoned shell. My throat was tight, choked. I tried to move, but my feet felt rooted. The silence was absolute, save for that distant hum, and it pressed in on me, amplifying the suffocating sense of isolation. This wasn't the house. This wasn't my reality. What was this place? And how had I gotten here? A vacuum that didn't just chill my skin but seemed to draw the very heat from my bones. My breath hitched, a thin, frosty cloud puffing from my lips. My fingers, still gripping the brittle pages, felt stiff, numb. The words swam before me in a legible dance of ink and shadow. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, but the blurring persisted, accompanied by a faint, high-pitched whine that seemed to resonate from the very air itself. It wasn't a sound I could pinpoint, more like a pressure behind my eardrums, an internal vibration. But the desperate need for understanding, for answers, was a stronger current. I forced my gaze back to the page, squinting, willing the letters to solidify. Slowly, painstakingly, they did. It was just the house again, just the library, or so I told myself. The next entries were not chronological. They were disjointed, scattered observations from various hands, penned in different inks and styles. The writer, perhaps a companion or a distant relative, documented her descent into a quiet, profound madness, culminating in her vanishing from her bed, leaving only the scent of withered roses. No trace was ever found. Another entry, written in a hurried, almost frantic hand, detailed the paranoia of a young man, a grandnephew who inherited the estate in the late 1800s. He believed the walls were listening, that the very foundation of the house breathed with a malevolent intent. The last sentence trailing off into a frantic, indecipherable scribble. It wants. It will take. The following pages were blank, as if the pen had simply been dropped mid-thought. I found a faded newspaper clipping tucked between two pages, brittle as ancient parchment. The headline, yellowed and faded, screamed of a local tragedy. Prominent landowner found deceased, apparent suicide. The article spoke of a respected industrialist, the patriarch of the family, discovered in the library, a single, empty glass beside him. No note, no apparent motive. But the description of his demeanor in the preceding weeks echoed the earlier accounts, increasingly reclusive, haunted eyes, a growing aversion to daylight. My fingers trembled as I turned another page. This entry was simpler, starker. A child's drawing, crudely sketched with charcoal, depicting the house as a monstrous, fanged mouth. Below it, in shaky, almost childlike letters, was a single sentence. The man with no face takes them away. No date, no signature, just the terrifying simplicity of a child's unfiltered fear. Who was this child? What had they seen? What had they experienced to draw such a thing? The weight of these stories pressed down on me, heavy and suffocating. Each tale, each fragment was a shard of a shattered mirror, reflecting a pattern of sorrow, of fear, of disappearance. It tasted of old paper and something else, something metallic and faintly sweet, like forgotten blood. My stomach churned. I stood, pushing the heavy book away from me as if it were a venomous thing. The old wood groaned under its weight. My legs felt weak, my head light. I needed to move, to breathe air that didn't feel steeped in generations of despair. I stumbled up the grand staircase, each step a creak, each creak a reminder that I was alone, truly alone in this vast, echoing tomb. Sleep came, but it was not a balm. It was a descent into a landscape of distorted reality, a dream born of the house's grim history. I was running, though I didn't know from what or to where. The air was thick with the smell of chlorine and stagnant water. I looked up. Above me, impossibly tall, loomed the twisted, colorful slides of a water park after hours, slides empty, pumps still running. The silence was profound, broken only by the distant hum of machinery, a low, throbbing pulse that vibrated through the ground beneath my soles. The slides, once symbols of joy and speed, now looked like the coiled intestines of some colossal, sleeping beast. It wasn't a human shape, not exactly. It was too tall, too thin, its limbs too elongated. It moved with a jerky, unnatural grace, gliding rather than walking. I tried to scream, but my throat was seized, constricted. I could feel its gaze, though there were no discernible features on its indistinct head. It was looking at me. It knew me. And then, without a sound, it began to climb the slick plastic wall of the slide, its impossibly long fingers finding purchase on the smooth surface. It was coming for me. It was going to slide down. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. Was it just a dream? I blinked, rubbed my eyes, trying to clear the lingering haze, the peculiar chill that had settled deep in my bones. I forced myself to stand, the old floorboards groaning in protest under my weight. The book, a ledger of forgotten names and cryptic dates, slid from my grasp, landing with a soft thud on the dusty rug. I didn't pick it up. My mind felt fragmented. Pieces of my past, memories I thought were solid, now seemed to shimmer at the edges, dissolving into uncertainty. Had I really locked the front door? Had I eaten breakfast this morning? The simplest facts of my day felt slippery, out of reach. A new sound started then, faint at first, a rhythmic thump-thump-thump from somewhere deep within the house. It wasn't the settling of old timber or the wind playing tricks. It was precise, insistent, like a slow, heavy heartbeat. The sound grew louder, pulling me down the hall past the shrouded furniture towards the kitchen. But it wasn't coming from the kitchen. It seemed to emanate from the very floorboards beneath my feet, vibrating up through the soles of my shoes. I stopped in the dining room, a vast, echoing space I rarely entered. The thump-thump-thump was directly below me now, a dull, resonant pulse. My gaze fell to the large, ornate rug that covered the center of the floor. Was it my imagination, or was the pattern subtly shifting, the faded roses blurring into something else, something less floral, more organic? I knelt, my fingers tracing the worn threads. No, it was just the light playing tricks. But the thumping continued, a silent pressure against my eardrums. Then the air shifted. It was humid, thick with the smell of chlorine and something else. Something metallic and faintly sweet, like old rust mixed with stagnant water. The walls of the dining room seemed to stretch, their familiar wallpaper replaced by smooth, curved surfaces of bright, artificial plastic. The ceiling vanished, replaced by a vast, open sky bruised purple with twilight. My breath caught. I was standing not in my ancestral home, but on a slick, wet concrete path. Around me, towering slides of yellow, blue, and red snaked upwards, their chutes empty and gleaming under the strange sky. The rhythmic thump-thump-thump was no longer a heartbeat. It was the deep, constant hum of unseen machinery, the distant churn of pumps still running. I was at a water park after hours, slides empty, pumps still running. How had I gotten here? I remembered kneeling on the rug, the thumping sound. Nothing else. No transition, no journey, just here. The air hung heavy, cloying. The smell of chlorine was overpowering now, burning the back of my throat. I walked forward, my steps echoing unnaturally in the vast, deserted space. The sound of the pumps was a constant drone, a low growl that seemed to vibrate through the very ground. Everything was still, frozen in a silent tableau. Too still. My gaze drifted to the largest slide, a massive, spiraling tunnel of deep blue. It rose like a plastic serpent, its entrance a gaping maw. And standing at the base, a small figure, a child. My heart seized. It couldn't be, not here, not like this. I started running, my feet slapping against the wet concrete. "Hey," I called out, my voice thin and reedy in the immense space. The figure didn't turn. As I got closer, the details solidified and a wave of nausea washed over me. It was a girl. Her hair, the same shade of rich brown as my own sister's, fell over her shoulders. She wore a bright pink swimsuit just like the one I remembered. The one she'd worn on our last family trip years ago before. My sister. Here, my breath hitched again. This was impossible. The girl turned slowly. Her face was pale, almost translucent, and her eyes, wide and unblinking, held a profound sadness. But it wasn't Sarah. Not really. It was a twisted reflection, a haunting echo. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. Instead, a gurgling noise, like water filling lungs, rattled in her throat. What are I doing here? I demanded, my determination warring with the rising panic. This isn't real. Then slowly she took a step back towards the gaping mouth. No, I lunged forward, but my feet slipped on the wet concrete. I fell, my hands scraping against the rough surface. I scrambled to my feet, ignoring the stinging pain in my palms. The pumps intensified, their growl becoming a roar, shaking the very ground. I could hear rushing water now, a torrent building somewhere deep within the plastic tubes. I peered into the slide's entrance, but I could hear it, a faint, desperate cry. "Help me, Seth," my sister's voice, young, terrified. The memory slammed into me that day years ago at the lake. The sudden storm, the overturned boat, my frantic, useless grasp, the way her hand had slipped from mine, her scream swallowed by the waves. I had failed her. I had always carried that. "I'm here," I yelled, my voice hoarse. I started to climb, my hands gripping the slick interior surface of the slide. The gurgling sound was louder now, closer, mixed with that desperate spectral cry. The climb was relentless. My muscles burned, my lungs ached. The smell of chlorine was suffocating. This was my fault, all of it. The entity was twisting the knife, using my deepest wound against me. It wasn't just showing me my fear, it was showing me my failure, proving my worthlessness. Suddenly, the slide opened into a wider, circular chamber, lit by a single flickering fluorescent tube. And there he was, the spectral child standing in the middle of the dark water which rose to her waist. Her head was bowed, her small shoulders shaking. "Sarah," I choked out, stumbling towards her. She looked up. Her eyes were still wide, still filled with that profound sadness. But now, in the flickering light, I saw something else in their depths. Not sadness, not even fear. A knowing. It wasn't a child's voice. It was deep, rasping, impossibly old. "You let her go," it hissed. "You wanted to be free, didn't you, Seth?" The words struck me harder than any physical blow. They weren't just an accusation, they were a suggestion, a poison seeping into the core of my being. Had a part of me, deep down, resented the responsibility, the burden of her existence. The thought was monstrous, unspeakable, but the entity planted it there, fertile and insidious. The water around her began to swirl faster, drawing her down. "No!" I screamed, lunging through the icy water. My hands reached for her, but she began to dissolve, her form blurring, stretching, becoming elongated and distorted. The water around her turned black, churning violently. My hands passed through her, grasping only frigid emptiness. The water surged, pulling me down, dragging me under. I thrashed, desperate for air, the taste of chlorine and something else, something bitter and metallic, filling my mouth. The roaring pumps became deafening. This wasn't just water. I gasped, my eyes snapping open. The air was still, thick with dust and the faint scent of mildew. I was lying on the worn rug in the dining room, my hands still scraped and stinging but dry. The ancient ledger lay discarded nearby. The thump-thump-thump was gone. The smell of chlorine, the purple sky, the towering slides all gone. Had I, deep down, harbored such a monstrous thought? And if it could plant such a seed of doubt, what else could it make me believe? What other parts of myself could it twist beyond recognition? The entity's words coiled in my gut like a venomous snake, tightening with every beat of my heart. Had I resented her, my sister? The thought was a raw, festering wound, a betrayal of everything I held sacred. I recoiled from it, shaking my head, a desperate, silent denial. No, never. But the seed was planted, a dark, insidious sprout pushing through the fertile ground of my own grief and exhaustion. The house hummed around me, A low, resonant thrum that felt less like a sound and more like a vibration deep within my bones, confirming the entity's delight in my torment. I spent the next few hours pacing, the floorboards groaning underfoot, each creak a mocking echo of my internal struggle. I needed air. I needed distance. I needed to escape the suffocating weight of the house and the insidious whispers that seemed to claw at the edges of my sanity. Then the world around me shimmered. Not a visual distortion, but a shift in reality itself. The air grew heavy with the scent of chlorine and something metallic, like stale water. I blinked, rubbing my eyes, but the scene solidified around me. I stood in a vast, echoing space. A water park after hours, slides empty, pumps still running. The low, rhythmic thrumming of unseen machinery vibrated through the ground, a constant, unsettling pulse. Towering structures of fiberglass, once vibrant blues and yellows, now loomed like skeletal giants in the dim, ambient light. A profound loneliness settled over me, heavier than any I'd ever known. This place, designed for joyous shouts and splashing laughter, was now a mausoleum of forgotten mirth. The emptiness was absolute, pressing in from all sides. My breath plumed in the cold air. Why here? What was this? Was I dreaming? I pinched my arm hard, a sharp, undeniable pain. This was real, or real enough for my senses to register it. It wasn't a distinct voice, but a suggestion of sound, a gentle murmur that seemed to caress the edges of my hearing. It spoke of solace. It spoke of peace. It spoke of an end to the ache that had taken root in my chest since the losses. I took a step forward, then another, drawn by an invisible current. The sound of the pumps, previously a distant thrum, grew louder, more insistent, a relentless heartbeat. I could feel moisture on my skin, a fine mist that clung to my eyelashes. "You don't have to carry it," the whisper solidified, clearer now, yet still ethereal, seeming to emanate from the very air around me, from the slick plastic, from the dark water. "Let it go. Let us take it." My stomach clenched. "Who are you?" I croaked, my voice swallowed by the immense space, a pathetic squeak against the pump's rumble. "We are the solace," the voice replied, closer now, a gentle breath against my ear, though no one was there. "The release. We are what remains when the pain is too great to bear alone." A shimmering, almost imperceptible distortion appeared in the still water at the base of the slide. It wasn't a reflection of me, but a swirling vortex of indistinct shapes, like faces seen through thick, moving glass. They were vague, sorrowful, yet also serene. A profound calm emanated from the swirling forms, a promise of absolute stillness. "Join us," the voice urged, its tone laced with an irresistible tenderness. "Share your burden, become part of the quiet, the endless peace." The invitation was a siren song, appealing directly to the raw, exposed nerves of my grief, to let go, to stop fighting, to simply be. For a horrifying second, a part of me yearned for it, for the cessation of the relentless internal battle. But then a flicker of something primal, something determined, ignited within me. This wasn't peace. This was oblivion. The faces in the water rippled violently, then vanished. The pumps, still running, now sounded like a frantic, desperate pulse, a warning. I turned and ran, my feet slapping against the wet concrete, the echoes chasing me. I ran blindly, past the silent wave pools, past the deserted snack stands, towards what I hoped was an exit. The cold air bit at my lungs. Then, as abruptly as it began, the world snapped back into place. I was standing in the hallway of my ancestral home, gasping for breath, clutching my phone in my hand. The chlorine smell was gone, replaced by the familiar scent of dust and damp wood. I stared at my phone, my fingers trembling. I had to reach out. I had to tell someone, anyone. I scrolled through my contacts, finding the number for a former colleague from the library, a quiet woman who had always been kind. My thumb hovered over the call button. I pressed it, holding the phone to my ear, my breath catching. A click. Then a dial tone. It rang once, twice. Then static. A harsh, tearing sound like fabric ripping, followed by dead air. I tried again, nothing. I checked the signal bars, full. I tried sending a text message. "Are you there? I need help." The message hung, a gray cloud, forever sending. My internet connection, too, was gone. The Wi-Fi symbol on my phone had vanished. The house, my home, felt like a cage. It wasn't just my phone, it was me. I was cut off, I was alone. The entity had shown me its offer, its twisted solace, and then it had ensured there was no escape. What did it truly want with me? The pumps, still running, hummed a low, guttural note that vibrated through the concrete beneath my sneakers. It wasn't just a sound anymore. It was a physical presence, a pressure against my eardrums. The whisper had vanished, but the silence it left behind was worse, heavy and absolute, like the air itself had solidified around me. I tried to swallow, but my throat was dry, a desert. I stood there, surrounded by the towering, empty structures of the water park after hours, slides empty, pumps still running. The fluorescent lights, sickly yellow in the vast expanse, cast long, distorted shadows that stretched and warped with every flicker. Each plastic slide, once a vibrant ribbon of laughter and descent, now looked like the coiled body of some ancient, dormant beast. I told myself it was just the isolation, the strangeness of the place. My mind was playing tricks. It had to be. My footsteps echoed as I moved, each sound magnified, swallowed, then returned to me. I walked past the children's splash pool, its shallow water still, reflecting the eerie glow of the lights like a shattered mirror. The smell of chlorine was sharp, antiseptic, but underneath it, something else lingered, a faint, damp earthiness like a grave disturbed. I tried to focus on an exit, on the thought of just getting out, but the water park felt endless, a labyrinth of blue plastic and concrete. Each turn led to another identical section, another series of slides looping into stagnant pools. I could hear the pumps more clearly now, a rhythmic thrumming that seemed to beat in time with my own frantic pulse. Then I heard it, a faint slosh. It wasn't the steady trickle from a pump or the gentle movement of water settling. This was distinct, deliberate, like something large shifting in a contained space. I froze, every nerve in my body screaming. My eyes darted to the nearest large pool, the one at the base of the tallest, steepest slide. The water there, murky under the dim lights, was indeed moving. Not a ripple, but a slow, internal churn, as if something immense was stirring beneath the surface. I told myself it was the filtration system, a sudden surge in the pumps. But the movement was too organic, too purposeful. It began to swirl, a lazy eddy forming in the center of the pool, growing wider, faster. My breath caught in my chest. The chlorine smell intensified, almost burning my nostrils. And with it, that damp, earthy scent grew stronger, sickeningly sweet. The eddy became a vortex, the water in the pool now actively boiling, churning on itself. It wasn't just moving, it was reaching. They writhed, black against the pale concrete, reaching for the lip of the pool, for me. My legs locked. I couldn't move. My mind raced, desperate for an explanation. A malfunction, a prank. But the sheer impossibility of it, the unnatural motion, the silent, terrifying formation of these water limbs. It shattered every last shard of my denial. This wasn't a trick of the light or a hallucination born of grief. This was real. The water tendrils grew thicker, longer, glistening under the artificial lights. I could hear a new sound now, a soft, sucking noise, like something pulling itself free from thick mud. The pumps continued their relentless drone, but it was drowned out by the escalating horror in front of me. I could feel the individual hairs on my arm standing on end. One of the tendrils, thicker than my arm, snaked over the edge of the pool, hitting the concrete with a wet slap. My blood turned to ice. My lungs burned. I tried to scream, but only a choked gasp escaped. I stumbled backward, tripping over my own feet, my heart slamming against my ribs like a trapped bird. It was fluid and solid all at once, a nightmare-given form. It was here in the water park after hours, slides empty, pumps still running, and it was undeniable. I was cornered. There was nowhere to go. The tendrils spread, blocking my path, forming a semicircle around me, each one reaching, stretching. My breath came in ragged gasps. This was it. It had found me. It was here. What did it want? The whisper had vanished, but the silence it left behind was worse, heavy and absolute, like a suffocating blanket. I was in a water park after hours, slides empty, pumps still running, and the air was thick with the metallic tang of stagnant water and something else, something cloying and ancient, like wet earth and forgotten things. My breath hitched, a thin, reedy sound in the vast, echoing space. Each step I took sent ripples through the unnatural quiet, the squeak of my sneakers on the slick, tiled floor seeming impossibly loud. The sheer scale of the place was disorienting. Massive, fiberglass slides, brightly colored in the daytime, now loomed like the skeletal remains of some gargantuan, playful beast. Their empty mouths gaped, black tunnels leading into deeper blackness, promising swift, silent descent into what? I didn't want to know. My eyes darted from one to another, half expecting to see movement in their depths, some dark form slithering out. The hum of the pumps intensified, not in volume but in its penetration. It felt like it was inside my head, rattling my teeth, vibrating behind my eyes. It wasn't just the place. It was the feeling that had followed me from the house, amplified, concentrated. I walked deeper, drawn by some unseen force past the skeletal remains of what must have been a wave pool, its surface a glassy, still sheet reflecting the dim lights like distorted eyes. My fingers twitched, wanting to clench into fists, wanting to grasp something solid, something real, but there was nothing. Only the slick tiles, the looming structures, and the incessant, throbbing hum. Then a flicker, in my mind. A flash of heat, then a sudden, jarring image, not of the water park, but of the house. Not as it was, but as it had been. Older. Stones rough-hewn, a flickering hearth, the scent of wood smoke, and something else, something metallic and sweet. The hum changed, twisted, becoming a low, guttural chant, a wordless song that resonated with a terrible hunger. My knees buckled. I braced myself against a low concrete barrier, the rough surface digging into my palms. My head swam, the world tilting violently. The hum was a roar now, and within it voices. The vision sharpened, twisting the water park around me. The empty slides became the twisting internal passages of a great living thing. The pool's stagnant eyes, the pumps its beating heart, and in the heart of it a presence. Not a ghost, not a spirit, something far older, far more fundamental. It was a hunger, a primal, insatiable need. I saw it or felt it in fragmented glimpses. It wasn't a creature of flesh and blood, not in any way I understood. It was a consciousness, ancient and vast, tethered to the land, to the very stones of the house. It had always been there, a silent, patient predator. It fed on emotion. Not just any emotion, but the deepest, most corrosive ones: grief, despair, loneliness. It didn't just feed on them, it cultivated them. Like a farmer tending a crop, it nurtured these feelings in its chosen prey, allowing them to fester, to grow, until they were ripe for harvest. The flash showed me generations. A young man, alone and heartbroken, staring out at an empty field. Each of them slowly, subtly driven to the brink, their emotions amplified, twisted, until their minds became a feast. And then when their spirits were utterly consumed, their bodies, they were just husks. Left behind, empty vessels, while the core of who they were, their essence, was drawn into the entity, becoming part of its ancient, ever-growing hunger. It didn't want to kill, not directly. It wanted to absorb, to assimilate, to grow. Each life it touched, each mind it devoured, added to its own terrifying existence, making it stronger, more pervasive. It was a parasite of the soul, a collector of human sorrow. And the house, my ancestral home, was its anchor, its hunting ground, a carefully crafted trap. My own grief, my own loneliness, my crushing despair over the losses I'd endured. I was perfect, a banquet laid out, waiting. It hadn't just found me, it had drawn me. My inheritance wasn't a fresh start, it was an invitation to my own consumption. The realization hit me like a physical blow, stealing the air from my lungs. I gasped, a ragged, desperate sound. The hum of the pumps was no longer a sound. It was the entity's voice, a triumph, a promise. It wasn't just in the house. It was here in this water park, or perhaps it was everywhere I went now that it had tasted me. I pushed myself away from the barrier, stumbling back. My throat was dry, my tongue thick. What could I do? How could I fight something that fed on the very essence of my being, something that had existed for centuries, something that already had its tendrils wrapped around my mind? What did it want to do with me once it had consumed everything? Suffocating weight. I had to move. I had to act. The knowledge I'd painstakingly pieced together, the fragments of diaries and the hushed confessions of past inhabitants, all pointed to one truth. This thing fed on inertia, on the slow decay of the spirit. It thrived in the quiet surrender. My determination, cold and sharp as a shard of ice, was my only weapon. I wouldn't give it what it wanted. I scanned the vast, echoing space of the water park after hours, slides empty, pumps still running. The giant, brightly colored flumes snaked across the ceiling, their gaping mouths like silent plastic predators. The air, thick with the smell of stale chlorine and damp concrete, felt heavy, pressing down on my lungs. My breath hitched, a small, ragged sound in the immense quiet. I had to get out. Not just out of this section, but away from the house's reach, away from its insidious tendrils that seemed to follow me even here. My plan, crude as it was, revolved around a simple idea: disorientation. The entity thrived on my despair, my isolation. If I could escape, find some connection to the living world, even just the distant lights of the town, it might weaken its hold. I started moving, my sneakers squeaking faintly on the wet floor, echoing back at me. Each squeak seemed to stretch, to multiply, until the sound felt like a chorus of tiny, unseen things scuttling just out of sight. I forced myself to ignore it. Focus. Exit. I navigated past the dark, still pools, their surfaces reflecting the emergency lights in distorted, shimmering patches. The water, usually so inviting, now looked like black glass, concealing unfathomable depths. I skirted around a towering structure of intertwined slides, a dizzying helix of plastic and metal. The pumps, a constant, low thrum, seemed to emanate from everywhere and nowhere, a vibration that resonated in my bones. It felt like the entire structure was a single, vast, breathing organism. A low, scraping sound drifted from the top of one of the slides. Not a human sound, not a mechanical sound. It was like something dragging itself across a rough surface, heavy and slow. My eyes darted up, following the curve of the bright orange chute. Nothing. Just the slick, empty interior reflecting the dim lights. My heart began to hammer, a frantic drum against my ribs. I picked up my pace, my movement stiff, urgent. My hands were clammy. I spotted a door, a heavy metal slab at the far end of the complex, marked with a faded emergency exit sign. Hope surged, a fleeting, dangerous thing. This was it. This was my chance. I pushed my legs harder, the squeaking of my shoes becoming a frantic rhythm. The hum of the pumps intensified, rising in pitch, a high-frequency whine that grated against my teeth. It wasn't just a sound anymore. It was a physical force pressing against my skull, blurring the edges of my vision. As I neared the exit, the air around me grew thick, like wading through unseen water. My feet felt heavy, each step an effort. The metal door, so clear a moment ago, now shimmered, its edges blurring. Was it just the light, or was the entity already twisting my perceptions? My hand closed around it, twisting. It was locked, of course. It was my mother's voice, then my father's, then a chorus of other, fainter voices I couldn't place, all echoing my deepest fears, my profoundest losses. "You can't leave," they breathed. "You belong here with us." My breath hitched. I pulled harder on the handle, rattling it against the frame, the sound too loud, too desperate. They were telling me things I already knew, things I'd tried to bury. They were pulling apart the seams of my composure, unraveling me thread by thread. Then, the water in the nearest pool began to ripple. Not a natural ripple, but a slow, deliberate undulation, as if something vast and unseen was stirring beneath the surface. It was skeletal, elongated, its fingers tipped with blunt, yellowed nails. It slowly, deliberately closed into a fist, then pointed directly at me. My blood felt like ice in my veins. The hand beckoned, its movement slow, hypnotic. I tried to back away, but my feet felt rooted to the concrete. I knew with a horrifying certainty that this wasn't just a physical trap. This was a deeper, more insidious ensnarement, designed not for my body but for my mind. The entity hadn't just anticipated my escape. It had used my very attempt to draw me further in, to reveal something more profound about its nature, about my nature. The house wasn't just a place. It was an extension of something far older, far more personal. The hand in the water wasn't just a threat, it was an invitation. Was I truly meant to be here? My breath hitched. I pulled harder on the handle, rattling it against the frame, the sound too loud, too desperate in the cavernous silence of the water park after hours, slides empty, pumps still running. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, weaving themselves into the hum of the pumps. They were pulling. It wasn't a door, not really. Just a gate, a service entrance to the guts of the operation, leading to a narrow, slick concrete passage that smelled overwhelmingly of chlorine and stagnant water. Ahead, the passage opened into a wider chamber, dimly lit by a single, flickering fluorescent tube high above. They weren't just in my head anymore. They were in the rush of air, in the drip, drip, drip from an unseen leak, in the rhythmic pulse of the machinery. They spoke of my losses, of the people I'd failed, of the emptiness that had settled in me like a permanent resident. Each word was a tiny barb hooking into a raw nerve, pulling at the frayed edges of my sanity. Useless, alone, forgotten. My knees felt weak. The pumps intensified their rhythm, a frantic, accelerating beat that matched the frantic hammering in my own chest. It made my stomach churn. It felt like my very essence was thinning, dissolving, like I was becoming transparent. My vision flickered, the fluorescent light above stretching and warping, the concrete walls seeming to undulate. I blinked, tried to clear my head, but it was like trying to scoop water with my bare hands. Give in, Seth. Let go. It's easier. No. The word formed in my mind, a fragile spark against the encroaching tide. This was what it wanted, wasn't it? It was feeding right here, right now, on the last vestiges of my hope, my will. My breath caught in my throat. I pushed away from the wall, forcing my trembling legs to move. I didn't know where I was going, only that I couldn't stay there, couldn't let it finish. Each step was a monumental effort, like wading through molasses. My head swam. I felt light, too light, as if gravity itself was losing its hold on me. You are nothing, you have nothing, join us. A sudden image flashed through my mind, unbidden, sharp and clear. A small, chipped ceramic mug, steam rising from it, a familiar hand reaching for it. The warmth of a morning sunbeam on a kitchen table. A laugh, soft and genuine. It was a memory, simple and profound, of a time before the emptiness, before the grief had become a part of me. It was a memory of warmth, of connection, of life. That was me. That was my memory, not the entity's. It was a fragment of who I was, a piece it hadn't devoured yet. I clung to it, clutching it like a drowning man to a spar. My chest burned. My lungs ached for air. I stumbled forward, my hand reaching out, grazing against the cool, slick plastic of an exposed pipe. They were conduits, veins, carrying the water that made this place run. Were they carrying something else now? I focused on the memory, on the warmth, on the simple, undeniable fact of my own existence. I am Seth. I am here. The entity recoiled just slightly, like a tide pulling back from a stubborn rock. It was a minuscule victory, but it was enough to fuel a flicker of anger, a desperate, animalistic will to survive. I wouldn't let it take this. I wouldn't let it take me. My limbs felt heavy, yet strangely detached. The world began to tilt. The pumps thrummed faster now, a frenzied drumbeat. Was I still standing? Was I still breathing, or was I merely an echo, a fading impression in this vast, hungry space? The memory, clear and vibrant, had been a beacon, a tiny shard of warmth in a landscape of desolation. It wasn't a trick of the house, not a phantom of its making. It was mine, real, it was life. And suddenly I understood. The entity fed on the absence of such things, on the hollow spaces it created. It thrived on the echo of what was lost, not on the thing itself. My grief had been its banquet, my loneliness its endless feast. But that memory, that laugh, it was a seed still alive. I pulled myself from the oppressive silence of the house, leaving behind the suffocating weight of its history. I had to face it, not within its walls where its power was absolute, but somewhere else. Somewhere that once held joy, now emptied. somewhere that would amplify the stark contrast of what I was fighting for. It was a tremor of anticipation, of a decision made and a path chosen. The air in the car was thick with my own breath, ragged and shallow. You can't win. There's no escape. But the memory of the mug, the sunbeam, the laugh, it was a counterweight, a steadying force against the entity's insidious pull. I found myself at the perimeter of the place I'd chosen, a structure of twisted plastic and faded primary colors, looming under the skeletal branches of winter trees. The fence was low, easily scaled, and I dropped onto the damp concrete with a soft thud. I was in the water park after hours, slides empty, pumps still running. The sound was the first thing that truly hit me. A low, rhythmic thrumming, a deep mechanical pulse that vibrated through the ground beneath my feet. The pumps, churning endlessly, pushing water through empty pipes, a pointless circulation in a desolate landscape. It was the heartbeat of a dead thing. The slides, once vibrant with children's screams and splashes, now lay like colossal, bleached bones, their curves and dips mocking the absence of life. The air was heavy, thick with the smell of chlorine mixed with something else, something earthy and damp like old concrete and forgotten sorrow. A single distinct shudder like a muscle contracting beneath a thin skin, then another and another. The ripples moved with an unnatural purpose, forming concentric circles that expanded outward faster and faster until the entire surface was a frantic, agitated shimmer. My breath hitched. My teeth began to chatter, an uncontrollable spasm. I could feel its presence now, a vast, formless pressure pushing down on me, trying to flatten me. Not distinct words, not at first, but a cacophony of sound, like 1,000 voices murmuring just beyond the edge of hearing, weaving themselves into the pump's drone. They clawed at the edges of my mind, promising oblivion, promising an end to the struggle. They spoke of my losses, of the people I'd missed, their phantom voices twisting their memories into sharp, painful barbs. You are alone, you always will be. This was its weapon, despair. It wanted me to give up, to surrender to the emptiness, but I wouldn't, not now. I closed my eyes, forcing the image of the chipped ceramic mug back into my mind, the warmth, the sunbeam, the laugh. I pushed against the crushing weight, trying to recall the exact curve of the hand reaching for the mug, the sound of that particular laugh. It was a struggle, a mental tug-of-war, but I found a flicker of strength. I left us. I let us go. The entity was trying to turn my very anchors into weapons against me. It was desperate, and in that desperation I saw it. It didn't just feed on despair. It was despair. It wasn't some ancient evil spirit from beyond, but the accumulation of all the abandonment, all the grief, all the broken hearts that had ever touched that house, coalesced into a malevolent sentience. It craved the absence of joy because it was the ultimate absence itself. It couldn't create, it could only consume. And that meant it couldn't understand. It couldn't feel the warmth of a memory, the simple truth of connection. It was blind to it. My eyes snapped open. I can't have it, I said, my voice stronger now, cutting through the murmuring din. I can't have any of it. I focused, not on fighting the despair it projected, but on projecting something else entirely. I forced myself to recall every detail of that cherished memory, every nuance of the sunbeam, the smell of coffee, the genuine, unburdened joy of that moment. I pictured it as a light, expanding from within me, a small, defiant sun in the dead landscape of the water park. The entity recoiled. The ripples in the wave pool turned violent, splashing over the concrete, wetting my shoes. The hum of the pumps intensified, grinding, straining, as if the machinery itself was in agony. It was resisting, pushing back with all its might, trying to smother the light, to drown it in a deluge of manufactured sorrow. My head pounded, a pressure building behind my eyes, and a sharp pain lanced through my temples. It felt like my mind was tearing. I stumbled, my knees threatening to buckle, but I kept the memory alive. I added another. A simple, shared joke, a moment of quiet understanding, a hand held in comfort, small things, human things, things the entity couldn't touch, couldn't consume, because it couldn't even perceive them. My determination solidified into a burning resolve. This wasn't just about me. It was about every life it had ever twisted, every soul it had ever consumed. "I can't win," I gasped, the words ragged but true, "not while there's still light." The water park groaned around me. The very air felt like it was being stretched thin, pulled taut between my will and the entity's ravenous hunger. Was this enough? Could a single, determined mind, armed with nothing but fragments of warmth, truly sever something so ancient and pervasive? The water park groaned around me, a hollow metallic sigh that seemed to emanate from the very concrete beneath my feet. The air, thin and stretched moments ago, now snapped back with a violent recoil, leaving a vacuum that sucked the breath from my lungs. I clung to the warmth, to the memory of my mother's laughter, the solid weight of my father's hand in mine, the simple comfort of a shared meal. These weren't just thoughts, they were anchors, burning points of light I flung into the encroaching void, desperate to sever the insidious tendrils that sought to reclaim me. I felt it, a sudden wrenching retreat like a root torn from deep earth. It wasn't a sound, but a deafening absence of pressure, a cessation of the suffocating weight that had pressed in on me for weeks. My knees buckled. I slumped against the base of a towering, empty slide, the slick plastic digging into my back. My muscles screamed, a dull, pervasive ache that resonated in every joint. My head throbbed, a relentless drumbeat behind my eyes. I tasted copper and salt, my tongue thick and dry. My vision swam, the vibrant blues and yellows of the slides blurring into a sickly, indistinct haze. Had it worked? Had the fragile fragments of my past, my humanity, truly been enough to repel something so ancient, so vast? The water park, after hours, slides empty, pumps still running, was a mausoleum of forgotten joy. The distant hum of the filtration system was the only sound now, a low mechanical thrum that felt both constant and utterly meaningless. A drip, drip, drip echoed from somewhere above, amplified by the cavernous space. My chest hitched. The fight was over for now, and all that remained was the aftermath, the trembling hands, the racing pulse that felt like a trapped bird in my rib cage. I pushed myself upright, every movement a monumental effort. My legs were unsteady, like a newborn foal's. The vastness of the place, once a playground, now felt like an accusation. Empty tubes snaked overhead, silent witnesses to my private battle. The shallow pools, reflecting the weak emergency lights, shimmered like obsidian mirrors. I saw my own distorted reflection in one, a gaunt, pale face framed by tangled hair, eyes wide and haunted. Was that truly me? Or had something else begun to wear my skin? Was it truly gone or merely waiting, a predator biding its time in the deeper currents of my mind? My car, parked in the deserted lot, looked impossibly small, a fragile shell against the encroaching vastness of the world. I fumbled with the keys, my hands shaking so violently I almost dropped them. The drive back to the house was a blur of empty roads and the occasional flickering street lamp. My mind replayed the confrontation not as a victory but as a narrow escape, a temporary reprieve. Had I merely pushed it back, or had I truly banished it? The question gnawed at me, a persistent ache behind my eyes. It looked different. It looked like any other old, decaying house devoid of its malevolent aura, but I knew better. I parked the car and killed the engine. The sudden silence was absolute, broken only by the chirping of crickets and the rustle of leaves in the ancient trees. I sat there for a long moment, my hands gripping the steering wheel, my grip tight. This was it, the aftermath. The house waited. As I walked towards the front door, the gravel crunching under my worn shoes, I noticed something else. The overgrown ivy that had choked the porch, clinging to the walls like grasping fingers, seemed withered in places, its leaves brittle and brown. A small, almost imperceptible detail, but it sent a shiver down my spine. Had my struggle, my desperate act, left a mark on the physical world, on the very structure of the house itself? The front door, usually heavy and resistant, swung open with an eerie lightness. The air inside was cool, stagnant, but no longer carried the familiar, suffocating scent of decay and despair. It smelled merely of dust and old wood. Dust motes danced in the slivers of weak sunlight filtering through the grimy windows. I walked through the silent rooms, my footsteps echoing unnaturally loud. The grand hall, the living room where the entity had often manifested, the dining room where I'd found the old diary they all felt. Empty, like a stage after the actors had departed, leaving behind only props and ghosts. I ran my hand over the dusty surface of the old mantelpiece. No psychic residue. It was just wood, old and scarred. I ascended the creaking staircase, each step a testament to the house's age. My bedroom, too, was simply a room. I stood in the center of the room, my chest rising and falling rapidly. The struggle was over. I had survived. But as I looked around at the familiar walls, at the objects I had brought into this place, I realized something. The entity might have retreated, but it had left an indelible mark on me. My perception of reality was irrevocably altered. The world no longer felt solid, predictable. The line between what was real and what was merely a reflection of my traumatized mind had blurred, perhaps forever. I walked to the window, looking out at the waking world. The sun was just peeking over the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink. It was a beautiful, ordinary morning, but I knew it would never be ordinary again for me. The house was quiet, yes, but its silence was a heavy blanket, a promise of something that could, and perhaps would, return. Could I ever truly feel safe again, even in the brightest light?